everyone, I'm Calluna, and welcome back to the last Season 7 Game of Thrones breakdown. Seems like we're gonna have another episode where the majority of it is tense conversation, leading to a devastating conclusion with explosions and fire. Nice. Well, without further ado, let's delve into Season 7, Episode 7, The Dragon and the Wolf. King's Landing. We start with everyone arriving to King's Landing. Our first shot is of Grey Worm and the Unsullied army lined outside the walls. Bronn talks to some soldiers making pitch, black tar to be poured down on enemies to prevent them from scaling the walls, and orders them to double it after seeing just how many Unsullied there are. After some fun quotes about cocks from Bronn, the Dothraki riders show up and join the Unsullied to make them look even more intimidating. Bronn admits that they are definitely at a disadvantage when it comes to numbers. Bronn was already hesitant about staying on with Jaime before seeing how scary Dany's forces could be. His words suggest he probably won't be sticking around King's Landing much longer. Meanwhile, Cersei has the Greyjoy fleet parked at Blackwater Bay to be an intimidating force for everyone arriving via boat. Tyrion, Varys, Theon, Jon, Davos, Missandei, Jorah, and the Hound. But no Dany. Interesting. The Hound checks on the White to see that it is still alive, which makes sense since they have no idea if it would stay animated this far south. After a brief chat with her crew, Cersei tells us that the meeting will take place at the Dragon Pit. While it has been mentioned briefly on the show before, this is the first time we'll get to see it properly. Conveniently, as Dany's group is walking there, Jorah gives a brief history lesson on the pit. Back in the days of the Targaryen rule, the dragons were housed in the pit to prevent them from attacking people and livestock, since they were like wild animals and would go after anything. However, due to years of being domesticated and kept locked away, eventually the dragons grew smaller and smaller until they died out. The show has kind of touched on this a little bit. The reason why Drogon is so much larger than Viserion and Rhaegal was because he was allowed to roam free while they were caged in the pyramid. This stunted their growth. The reason for the pit's ruin is due to an uprising by the small folk called the Storming of the Dragon Pit. Tens of thousands of starving small folk broke into the pit and killed 5 of the dragons. The dragons tried to fight back, but due to the small space, they couldn't fly. Their flames ended up destroying much of the pit to what it looks like now. Bronn greets the crew, bringing Brienne and Podrick to meet up with them along with several Lannister guards. Podrick gets a nice quick reunion with Tyrion, and as they walk to the meeting, Brienne chats briefly with the Hound. I like how they're treating the fight like a one-night stand that they're totally going to forget about and never mention again. They bond over Arya, Brienne mentioning how strong of a fighter Arya has become, while the Hound acts almost like a proud papa. Under normal circumstances, this conversation would just be really weird, but the two actors really sell it here. Tyrion is hanging with his old King's Landing crew of Bronn, Podrick, and Varys, and Tyrion tries to convince Bronn to join with them, again offering him twice whatever Cersei offers, and also mentioning that Bronn has put himself at risk by arranging this meeting. Bronn counters by saying he's put them at risk. Cersei at any time could take their heads, and he'd be paid just the same. I love this look that Varys has in the background. He's like quietly impressed. I love when the actors do small stuff like that in the background. They finally arrive at the pit, and we see just how, despite it being in ruins, how big this must have been, especially when we pull back and see the scope of it. I had always pictured it as more bone-like in design, but it makes sense that there were some limitations with this considering they were filming in an actual arena in Spain. This also explains why the doors don't look large enough to actually house dragons. Bronn takes Podrick off to go get drinks, while the important people chat. I thought this was actually going to pay off later, either with them talking or Bronn joining up with Tyrion and the rest, but nope. I guess this is just supposed to add more tension. Bronn doesn't want innocent Podrick getting caught up in all this or something. Cersei and her group arrive, and she gives Tyrion the scariest death glare. Oof. Now, since we have so many characters arriving, we do get a lot of side eyes and looks, since so many of them are connected to one another. Euron and Theon, Cersei and Tyrion, Jaime and Brienne, the Hound in the Mountain. You get it. Lot of dramatic looks this episode. Speaking of which, the Hound confronts the Mountain, and he promises he will be the one to end him. Man, someone's been watching a lot of WWE, huh? Also, kinda funny now that the Mountain is roughly the same height as the Hound. He's supposed to be significantly taller, and the guy who played him in the first season was indeed taller than the Hound. I guess being a zombie shrinks you a little bit? Oh well, no Clegane Bowl this time, folks, but hey, there's always next year! Cersei is pissed Dany is late, but of course she needed to make an entrance, so she flies in with Drogon and Rhaegal. She has them fly off when she lands, a smart move since she knows that Cersei has built the ballistas before and could pull them out at any time. As Tyrion starts to talk, Euron immediately interrupts to goad Theon, telling him he has Yara and to surrender to him. I love the look Tyrion has on his face, like, excuse me, I was in the middle of something here? Tyrion doesn't seem intimidated by Euron's weird attitude, though, even having a cute moment with Theon. Jaime and Cersei both tell Euron to shut up, so that's nice. Tyrion begins to talk to the group about how they hate each other, but they need to come together. Jon backs him up by explaining about the army of the dead. Of course, Cersei doesn't believe them, so it's time for a demonstration! The Hound brings the box containing the white and lets it out, scaring the crap out of anyone who hasn't already seen them, so most of them, really. The Hound cuts it in half, showing that it's still moving even after a deadly attack, proving it isn't just a man in a costume and makeup. Of course, Qyburn is fascinated given his interest in the dead. Jon demonstrates that fire and dragonglass can destroy them, and that an army of these creatures will be attacking soon. Euron, after learning the Whites can't swim, decides he wants out and is taking the Greyjoy fleet with him. You know, considering how unwinnable the situation could look, yeah, that's actually a rather intelligent move by Euron. Huh. Alright. Cersei says she will agree to the truce, but only if Jon doesn't choose sides when they get back to their fight. Unfortunately, Jon can't lie very well, so he says he's pledged to Dany's cause, which pisses off Cersei, and she leaves. Brienne tries to talk to Jaime, saying honor won't mean anything if they're all dead. If Brienne, of all people, tells you fuck loyalty, you know shit is real. Houses, loyalties, grudges, all of them won't matter in a battle of life and death. Everyone is kind of pissed off at Jon for not lying, and his argument of lies won't help us in this fight is sorta contradictory since Cersei just left. I mean, I get his logic, they need to be on the same page or else they won't be able to fight the army of the dead, but I mean, if you're going to break it up to anyone, breaking one to Cersei doesn't seem all that bad if it means getting help. Tyrion decides he'll be able to talk Cersei into helping them. Oh yeah, I'm sure you, the one person she wants to murder more than anyone, will help. Yeah, okay. Before meeting with Cersei, Tyrion briefly chats with Jaime, who's in a much friendlier mood than their last chat. Seems the demonstration struck a chord with him, at least. It seems these two are beginning to patch up their relationship, which is good to see. Not so much with Tyrion and Cersei. They have a really tense argument about their family. Tyrion tries to defend his actions, admitting his part in Tywin's death but not Joffrey, Myrcella, or Tommen's. Cersei counters this by saying killing Tywin was the beginning of the destruction of their family. In a way, she's sorta right. Tywin was an imposing figure and the linchpin of their power. With his death, it left Cersei and Jaime vulnerable. And Cersei makes some very stupid decisions, like giving power to the Sparrows. Of course, Cersei always places the blame for her misfortunes on others, so she conveniently doesn't mention that part. We get a very tense moment as Tyrion realizes the conversation isn't going anywhere, yelling at Cersei that he loved Myrcella and Tommen, and that if she truly blamed him for their deaths to have the Mountain kill him. Surprisingly, she doesn't. Tyrion drinks some wine, pouring a glass for Cersei, who doesn't take it. Remember how Varys was taking wine from Tyrion in an earlier episode to keep his wits about him? Perhaps the fact that Tyrion drinks here, while Cersei doesn't, foreshadows Cersei's deception later. Anyway, Tyrion notices that both Cersei doesn't drink the wine, and she touches her stomach while talking about her family. He puts it together that she is pregnant. This was a really good scene, and probably one of my favorite moments since these two are having such a tense conversation and it could go any which way. These two then, off-screen, managed to come to a compromise, since we then cut back to the dragon pit after he realizes she's pregnant. Dany and Jon spend some one-on-one time at the pit, Dany reminiscing about how the loss of the dragons was foretelling her family's demise. She says in High Valyrian, a dragon is not a slave, and man, I hope someone's been keeping track of these because this season has hit the jackpot on callback lines. This was what she said to the Masters when she acquired the Unsullied. I might actually go back and see just how many callback lines there were this season now that it's over. It's quite a lot compared to other seasons. Anyway, again Dany mentions her not being able to have kids, but Jon asks how would she know that. Mirri Maz Duur did mention it in the books, though the show omitted that line, but Dany treats it as if she said it anyway. When Jon says that's not exactly a reliable source, you do kinda need to remember she hadn't gotten pregnant with Daario at all despite them sleeping together. Well, in any case, since the show keeps bringing this up now, clearly these two are going to have a child sometime soon because, you know, the show is so subtle about it. Tyrion comes back along with Cersei and her crew, but rather than merely having a truce, Cersei offers to have her armies join Jon and Daenerys, making a point to say that they should remember her helping despite them not making any promises to her. When I was first watching this, I was legitimately surprised by this move, but I attributed it to Cersei being worried about the safety of her unborn child. Tyrion looks super confident too, so you have to figure he convinced her by having her think of protecting her baby. Too bad Cersei's later discussions prove that no, she didn't intend to help. Man, Tyrion and the rest are getting played super hard right now. Winterfell. Sansa receives a letter from Jon, and while Littlefinger tries to make up an excuse for why Jon hadn't sent a letter before now, oh, the bad weather made the ravens unable to deliver it, Sansa says, no, of course Jon didn't bother sending one before now. Sansa attributes this to him not trusting her opinion, though you could argue that Jon did trust Sansa with keeping Winterfell intact, but was naive about the trouble she would encounter. Sansa is upset he didn't consult her before bending the knee to Daenerys, though Littlefinger says maybe Jon thinks she's hot and he wants to marry her. Also, hey, if he could be named king in the north that easily, maybe he can be unnamed? Sansa says Arya would kill her if she did that. Littlefinger plays a bit more into his scheming when Sansa asks him what Arya's motivations could be. By telling Sansa to imagine the worst-case scenario, he steers her into thinking that Arya would kill Sansa to usurp her as Lady of Winterfell. This is what Arya threatened to do to Sansa last episode. Littlefinger seems confident in her deductions. Perhaps he was listening in on their conversation? It certainly appears that Sansa has fallen for Littlefinger's plan, but we'll see later just where this actually goes. Dragonstone. Dany is having yet another council meeting, though now everyone of importance, still alive or uncaptured anyway, are there to discuss her right up to the north. Jorah suggests flying on her dragon since she could have enemies in the north, despite Jon's treaty. Of course, she decides to go with Jon, showing that she trusts his opinions. If they arrive together, it sends a better message. And of course, she gets a nice sweet boat ride with Jon. Oh, sorry, Sir Friendzone. After the meeting, Theon asks to talk with Jon. Theon tells him he's envious of Jon since he always does the right thing regardless of what it means for his own safety. Theon confesses his struggles growing up in Winterfell and trying to find his identity as both a Greyjoy and a ward of the Starks. Of course, Jon forgives him and tells him that he doesn't need to choose. He can be both. I wonder if he's going to have that same attitude once he finds out he's not just a Stark, but also a Targaryen. But in all seriousness, I think this was actually a rather nice thing for him to say to Theon, since both of them struggled as outsiders among the Stark children. It's probably why Theon was always so cruel to him. At least he wasn't a bastard. Theon says Yara was the only one who tried to rescue him when he was Ramsay's prisoner, and he needs to go save her. Naturally, Jon tells him to go get her. Theon goes to the small group of Greyjoys and asks them to help him rescue Yara. The one who mocked him earlier says there's no way she's alive, or they just wouldn't be able to save her. Instead, they plan to sail to an island to plunder it, since somehow they found out that the Whites can't swim. Theon insists that they need to save Yara since she's their queen, but the man tries to beat the crap out of him when Theon won't back down. He tries to end it by kicking Theon in the crotch over and over, but apparently without his dick it doesn't do much to him. Okay, wait, even if it has been some time, that should still hurt. Maybe not as much as a normal hit, but something. And the pain normally comes from getting hit in the balls, not the dick, and as far as we know, Ramsay only cut off his dick. In any case, this should be doing at least some damage to him, even if it isn't enough to make him keel over. Anyway, thanks to the confusion, Theon manages to knock the guy down and wail on him until he's either dead or knocked out. Kinda hard to tell. Anyway, now that Theon has proved himself to be a man, well, kinda, the others decide to follow him and help him rescue Yara. While I'm glad that Theon is finally moving forward with his character development again, I can't help but again mention how disappointed I am with how Yara is being used for the story. You take one of the most capable and strong female fighters and make her a damsel to be rescued? She does get captured in the books by Stannis, yes. But at least there, we know she would be treated alright and not outright tortured. Plus, she is trying to help stop Stannis from killing Theon for taking over Winterfell. Even when both of them are prisoners, she is still trying to save him. I would have almost preferred her to just be killed off and Theon avenges her. At least this way she would have gone out fighting. It's kind of a disservice to her. I actually like Theon a lot. I know, I'm a big fan of characters who people really don't like. But I really wish we could have spent more time with these two as siblings. Hopefully she hasn't had her tongue cut out by Euron, assuming she's still actually alive. Winterfell. Again. Sansa poses for the trailer while up on the top of the walls, then goes to one of her guards and tells them to bring Arya to the Great Hall. Sansa and Bran are at the table while Royce, Littlefinger, and several soldiers are stationed there. Arya comes in and is made to look like she's surrounded by guards in case she tries to run. But it's actually a ruse. Instead of calling Arya for treason, Sansa calls Littlefinger, who clearly wasn't expecting this. Too bad you didn't think of all situations, huh, Baelish? Sansa lists the charges against him: murdering Lysa Arryn, conspiring with Lysa to murder Jon Arryn, having Lysa send the letter to Catelyn blaming the Lannisters for it and starting the conflict between the Starks and the Lannisters, betraying Ned by working with Cersei and Joffrey, and finally that betrayal leading to the false charges of treason and Ned's death. When Baelish denies the crimes he can't explain away, Bran finally activates his powers of plot convenience to prove that he saw visions of the betrayal. Arya then pulls out the Valyrian dagger, saying that Littlefinger also lied to Catelyn about the dagger being Tyrion's. It's actually his. This was done in order to further create tension between the Lannisters and the Starks. And of course, Sansa mentions Littlefinger selling her to the Boltons, though this one might actually have been an accident, since Show Baelish apparently was not aware of Ramsay's true nature. Realizing he can't weasel his way out of this, Littlefinger first tries to have Royce escort him back to the Vale, since he's the Lord Protector, but apparently Littlefinger forgot just how much Royce hates him. Before they left for Winterfell, Baelish threatened him with death if he didn't comply. Plus, he had assumed Littlefinger had killed Lysa after marrying her to assume power anyway. So you choose that guy to ask for help? Wow, nice try. He's reduced to a weeping mess, getting on his knees and begging for Sansa to save him. Kind of a nice thing to see. In the beginning, Littlefinger was the one with all the power, while Sansa had been the pawn. Now she has finally become confident in herself and his schemes have fallen apart all around him. Sansa sentences him to die, and Arya cuts his throat with the Valyrian dagger. Ew, he's bleeding all over the floor. Clean up on Great Hall 1. So viewers weren't exactly sure what happened with the sisters. Did they actually fight and Sansa figured it out after her talk with Baelish? Or had they been playing him all along? It's possible that the original intention was to have them play act those awful scenes of them fighting to lure Littlefinger into a trap, but we never get any clear indicators of this. Both sisters mention things that only Bran could have told them. If they knew ahead of time about these things, why bother with the elaborate ruse? My guess is that this was set up by the writers to have the audience think that they might kill each other, but not with the setup of them trying to trick him. Here's my reasoning. Sansa mentions that she's a slow learner, but she learns. So that would suggest that yes, he was indeed stringing her along and she was falling for the ruse. The other is that I think Sansa puts the pieces together by talking with Littlefinger earlier in the episode. The reasoning she comes up with, and probably what Littlefinger was expecting, was that Arya was trying to become a lady, something we know is definitely not true. How would Sansa know this? The lying game. Arya never specifies Sansa's the only one playing. When Arya mentions that she's curious about wearing dresses and being like Sansa, it's her way of trying to intimidate her sister, but it's also a part of the game. She's trying to sell a convincing lie. After Sansa stops to really think about it though, she figures that Arya wouldn't want to be like a lady. She's never wanted to. Obviously, there was an off-screen conversation that took place with Arya, Sansa, and Bran, where Bran filled in the gaps. Bran's actor even mentioned in an interview they filmed a scene where Sansa goes to Bran for help, which was cut then most likely to create the surprise. Sansa knew about Lysa's death, of course, but the rest would need to be filled in by Bran, since in the show Sansa isn't aware of Lysa murdering Jon Arryn, though in the books Lysa screams it when she threatens to throw Sansa out the moon door. Although it's possible the sisters were playing Littlefinger the whole time, I doubt it. It seems the best explanation for why it gets dragged out is the writers. They were using this conflict as the main Winterfell story, so of course they're not going to show the girls tricking Littlefinger since they wanted it to be a surprise. Yeah, I don't think most people were happy with this, but hey, at least now Littlefinger's dead and the Starks are united. King's Landing. Again. Jaime converses with several of his soldiers, discussing their travel plans to head up north. Cersei dismisses them, asking Jaime why he's bothering with that, revealing she has no intention to have her men join the cause. Jaime, being the honorable type now, is upset with Cersei's decision, pleading with her since he's obviously shaken by the threat of the Whites. Cersei counters that they have weaknesses, and isn't it weird that Dany made a show of power with only 2 dragons? Probably would have been smarter to just have Drogon with you when you arrived, Dany. Although Jaime's point of it possibly guarding the boats makes some sense, it seems Cersei has figured out that Dany's forces have been hurt. When Jaime says that the victor will eventually come fight them, Cersei reveals that Euron didn't head to the Iron Islands. Instead, she gave him the gold to bring to the Iron Bank to hire the Golden Company. That seems like a bad idea, giving the pirate all your gold, assuming the Iron Bank didn't already have the gold. If Euron was smart, he'd take the Golden Run to Essos to escape all the fighting, but no, it seems, for now, he's going to get the army in exchange for marrying Cersei. This part was honestly a bit of a surprise for me, since I thought it was a rather practical choice for Euron to flee to save his own skin. But then again, he did say he wanted the throne, and if Cersei presented the same argument about the whites to him, he probably would have agreed to it. Jaime is pissed that Cersei didn't consult him on this. He promised them that he would join in the fight against the dead, and he intends to fulfill it. When he tries to leave, the mountain stops him, and Jaime challenges Cersei to have him killed. Once again, though, Cersei doesn't kill her brother, but this time it's out of love. Before, she let Tyrion figure out she was pregnant in order to create a decent enough reason for her to agree to unite with them. Cersei is still a master manipulator after all. It's why she doesn't kill Tyrion. She needed him to think he had won by convincing Cersei in order to send Dany's forces north. Jaime leaves, leaving Cersei all alone. Jaime is seen outside the city on his horse, and as he puts a glove on his gold hand to hide his identity, we see that snow has finally arrived to King's Landing. Jaime rides off, alone it would seem, which is weird. I figured Bronn would be with him at the very least. It's why that scene with Podrick and Bronn felt off to me. That seemed like a good place to set up either Bronn leaving to go with Tyrion's group, or joining up with Jaime to then join up with Tyrion's group. Bronn did want to live a comfortable life without fighting though, but I doubt we've seen the last of him. All I can say with Jaime leaving is, it's about damn time! I get that they wanted to extend his stay with Cersei to make his eventual leaving all the sadder, but it really was a detriment to his character. He kept making excuse after excuse for staying with Cersei, despite her increasingly erratic and terrible behavior. I honestly can't believe he stayed with her after she used wildfire to blow up the Sept. The very thing Aerys tried to do. The event that led to his being branded the Kingslayer, which would haunt him for the rest of his life. I did not expect him to stay with Cersei as long as he did for Season 7, but at least now he's finally done it. Winterfell Final. Sam arrives at Winterfell and goes to chat with Bran, who tells Sam he became the Three-Eyed Raven. Sam, the lovable doofus, doesn't understand but doesn't really try to question it. When Bran explains his powers, Sam assumes that is how he knows Jon is on his way back to Winterfell, which was actually kind of a cute comedic moment with Bran pulling the letter out. Oh my god, a joke that actually made me laugh? See? Robot Bran can be funny without being creepy. Bran tells Sam he needs to tell Jon about his true parentage, explaining that Rhaegar and Lyanna are his parents and that his last name should technically be Sand since he was born in Dorne. This is not a hard rule in the books. Some bastards earn their names based on the location of birth, while others are determined based on the noble family's location. So Jon's last name could have been Snow for Lyanna, Sand for being born in Dorne, or Waters, the name given to bastards in the Crownlands. Sam somehow remembers the entry Gilly mentioned to him about Rhaegar's annulment, telling Bran that no, Jon is a legitimate heir. Although we saw Gilly reading it, my guess is that Sam had already transcribed the page, which might explain his being short with her. She was repeating back stuff he already knew. Of course, Sam wouldn't have known the implications of this at the time, though really, Lyanna's kidnapping being the leading events of Robert's rebellion, Sam probably should have remembered that. Bran uses his green sight to witness Lyanna and Rhaegar's marriage, done in the same Faith of the Seven ceremony we've seen a few times now, which is a little odd considering Rhaegar's obsession with the prince who was promised theory. Although it's short, there are a lot of nice details here. Rhaegar looks very similar to Viserys, sporting a similar hairstyle. This makes you think then if Varys was trying to emulate his brother by sporting a similar hairstyle. Also, Lyanna's dress is blue. Lyanna is associated with blue roses in the books, so having that be the color of her dress is rather fitting. Unfortunately, we juxtapose this revelation with Jon going to Dany's room and eventually the two of them having sex. Okay, wow, did they really want this to be as uncomfortable as possible? Bran says Robert's rebellion was based on a lie, so by juxtaposing this with Jon and Dany getting together, with Tyrion looking on ominously, this is film shorthand for, well, this is going to lead to some bad shit. Jon and Dany are sleeping together, damn the consequences. The same attitude Rhaegar and Lyanna had that led to the rebellion in the first place. Plus, you know, incest. Ugh. We then cut to Lyanna's death scene again from last season, but this time we hear what she says. His name is Aegon Targaryen. You have to protect him. Promise me, Ned. Okay, wait, hang on. Jon's real name is Aegon. Rhaegar already had a son named Aegon with Elia Martell. Kinda weird to name another kid that. Then again, he did annul the marriage, so maybe he doesn't give a shit about those kids now. It certainly would fit with the Tudor history that the books are based on. Henry VIII was notorious for annulling marriages and making legitimate children illegitimate, and back and forth. It's possible that Lyanna heard about the children's deaths and wanted to name the boy after his now dead half-brother, but that seems a little odd. And how likely is it that Lyanna would know this? She had to know that Rhaegar was dead at this point, so why not name Jon after his father? The show has mentioned the children by name at least once. Thoros mentions the names of them to the Hound in Season 3, so this isn't an easy retcon if they just didn't mention the names. I doubt this is Jon's true name in the books, assuming that he has another name. Rhaegar was insistent on having 3 heads of the dragon. It might have been why he had a child with Lyanna in the first place, to fulfill the prophecy of the prince who was promised, since Ilya Martell was fragile and couldn't have any other children. My guess for why the show has his name be Aegon is to try and create more tension between him and Dany once this is revealed. The show has been making comparisons between Dany's conquest and Aegon the Conqueror's. Now that we suddenly have a stronger claim to the Iron Throne, who carries the name of the original Uniter of the Seven Kingdoms, this name is meant to impact the audience. It's a familiar name, one this season has made sure to repeat over and over again. We then cut to Sansa and Arya chatting up on the walls. Seems like this is where all the Starks go after they've had arguments and need to make up. We finally get the conversation we've been waiting for all season. The girls coming together, saying how strong the other is, and just acting like normal siblings again. It's nice to see that Arya is actually displaying some emotion. It's clear from her behavior before she was emulating Jaqen's mannerisms and movements in order to instill fear. She isn't exactly the scariest looking person on her own. But now that they know that they can trust one another, the girls repeat Ned Stark's words. When the snow falls and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. This was a really nice scene with the sisters, and one I'd been waiting so long for. It was such a waste of a season having these two bicker for as long as they did. It felt like the two of them were reverting back to their Season 1 characters. There was so much that the showrunner skipped or barely mentioned for other characters or plots, yet they felt the need to drag these two stories on for the entire time. We didn't need to see them every episode, it just seemed pointless in the end. We knew Littlefinger's end was near from episode 1. Brienne flat out says, why the hell is he still here? I hope they were paying attention to the reaction this subplot had and finish out the series without another stupid subplot. Eastwatch. Bran uses his green sight to warg into ravens and check on Eastwatch, where Tormund and Beric are watching the forests for movement. The army of the dead arrives along with the White Walkers, and we get a nice callback when the hornblowers blow 3 times, indicating the arrival of Whites or White Walkers. The army stops right near the wall, and then we hear a dragon cry. The Night King arrives, flying on Viserion, who uses his now blue flames to start breaking apart the wall. The flames eventually go through the wall, and a large chunk of it falls. We see Beric and Tormund near a portion of the intact wall, so I'm pretty sure they're alive for now. With the wall now breached, the army begins to proceed through, and the last shot of the season is the army heading south with the Night King and Viserion leading the way. Well, while the wall falling isn't exactly a surprise, I mean, I predicted it last year, and this season has teased it enough to know it wasn't going to stay intact, but it was a really cool scene. I was wondering if Viserion would breathe fire or frost, now that he's a white, but it seems that he's breathing blue flame. Kind of ironic, since blue flame is hotter than red, but hey, blue eyes, blue flames, it makes sense aesthetically. It was only a small portion of the wall, sure, but the reality of what it means is far worse. The wall has been around since the initial defeat of the White Walkers by the First Men and the Children of the Forest. Its protective magics have guarded the realm for thousands of years, and yet, one undead dragon managed to breach it in 2 minutes. Damn! I mean, it makes sense that the wall was ice. Creatures who are using ice or made of ice wouldn't have had the means to break a magic ice wall without a large source of fire, which they now have. Well, I hope nobody was in Last Hearth or Carhold, because they're gonna be dead. Conclusion. And so, that was Season 7. What did I think? Overall, kind of disappointing. Certainly had a lot of cool moments and character interactions, but the pacing suffered quite a bit due to the number of episodes and the amount of stuff they needed to jam into it. I really think if they had the 10-episode format again, it would have allowed for a less rushed season overall. I think the most disappointing aspect of the season was the predictability of it. Most of the story beats were pretty easy to read, and any surprises I had came from a leap in travel for the most part, figuring certain things wouldn't happen due to travel restrictions. I'm actually surprised Cersei didn't have a miscarriage, but perhaps they're saving that for Season 8. I just figured that the one person who's always been there for her abandoning her might be a strong enough shock for Cersei to miscarry. There's no way that kid is making it out of here alive, though, that's for sure. I still enjoyed watching the show, but it did take some of the fun out of the experience when I was able to pretty accurately predict where each thing was going. And more often than not, it was due to, well, how else will they do X thing? Leaps of logic are not always a bad thing if they have a good payoff. But for me, there were so many that I would often be taken out of the experience and questioning a lot of the choices that were made. I know not everyone agrees with me on this, which is fine, to each their own, but I want to be honest when I'm making these videos. Game of Thrones, for me, was so good because we saw consequences for actions, sometimes good, mostly bad. But Jon Snow has been rescued so many times that it seems like he's wearing the protagonist armor that most Game of Thrones death usually avoid. I don't mind if a character makes a dumb decision so long as it has consequences. The later seasons have kinda stopped doing that. Arya is able to get away with so much with hardly any consequence at all. Jon is rescued from a stupidly impossible situation by Deus Ex Machina Uncle Benjen. It just seems unfair to earlier characters that they died, while these characters get off kinda scot-free. It just seems to have lost a lot of what makes the story unique. Despite the fantastical elements, Martin's world works with a certain set of rules, and once those rules are bending or broken in order to facilitate some badass action scenes or some really cool character moments, or just odd choices, over time it begins to make us see just how simplified the show has become. This was the season of cleanup, extraneous subplots being trimmed down, for the most part, characters whose stories were pretty much done were axed off, and major alliances were formed between the majority of the main characters. The theme was focusing on the true fight up north. Once that is dealt with, then they can get back to vying for the Iron Throne, so if that's the case then, the battle against the Night King may not be the conclusion to the story after all. It's kinda hard to tell. There's really only so much that can happen besides fighting the army of the dead. It's why I was so surprised Cersei was still alive, story-wise. Obviously, marketing-wise, Lena Headey is a great actress and people love seeing her on the show. There are still quite a few non-combatant characters who've managed to live so far. Sansa, Varys, Missandei, Qyburn, to name a few. It'll be interesting to see what happens besides just the fight between Jon Snow and the Night King. So, what did you guys think of this episode? How about the season overall? Did you find it disappointing, like I did, compared to previous seasons? I'm planning to do another predictions video, this time for Season 8. So, write down your predictions below so I can see what you guys expect. Who dies? Who lives? And will the Tenuous Alliance manage to stay strong? I'm also kicking around the idea of a Q&A video or a live stream for Season 8. Is that something you guys would be interested in seeing soon? Please let me know. If that is the case, feel free to post any questions that you have for me below, and I'll try to address them in the Q&A video. I'll be posting more info about that on Twitter soon, so if you guys aren't already following me there, feel free to. My Twitter handle is @CallunaReviews. Alright everyone, we made it through the penultimate season, only one more year to go. I'm Calluna, and thanks for tuning in to Season 7's episode breakdowns. I'll see you guys in the next Game of Thrones videos. Bye! Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know I have a Patreon page. If you're not familiar with Patreon by now, it's a website that allows you to donate a small amount each month to your favorite content creators. You'll get a bunch of different rewards depending on the amount that you donate. Feel free to check out my page to see what kind of rewards that you can get by helping to donate. Every little bit helps, and helps to make this show even better, so wouldn't be able to do it without you guys. Thanks.
Geek Vision.